Story 1. Mobile phones became common in my country around 2004. Just as I finished high school, my parents bought me my first phone, a second-hand Nokia. It was bulky and basic, but I promised myself that someday I'd buy a new phone with my own money. When college started, I had a 2-hour daily commute. Back in high school, I had excelled academically and won several district-level awards. These awards were being distributed during my first year of college, and one award from a nationalized bank finally gave me enough money for a new phone. I bought a Sony Ericsson K300i and a premium subscriber identification module card, not realizing it had been abandoned by its previous owner. By the third day, I started receiving calls for a person named Bitsa from various financial institutions. It turned out the number had previously belonged to him, and for 20 years I have been getting these calls. Determined to keep my premium number, I began a routine of blocking wrong numbers. Back then, blocking was specific to each device, so each time I got a new phone, I had to start over, keeping a list of numbers to block. I got my first job after graduating in 2009. Around 2010, I was assigned to a new project with a notorious reputation for causing burnout, largely due to a manager known for creating a hostile work environment. I didn't know his full name for quite a while, but everyone called him Bits. He took pride in making our lives challenging. Bits ruled with an iron fist. From the moment his team stepped into the office, they were met with a barrage of emails and messages, each more urgent than the last. Bits thrived on creating chaos, often changing project deadlines on a whim and demanding his team work late into the night and through weekends. Bits' presence loomed over every task. He insisted on micromanaging every detail, yet was quick to take credit for any successes, no matter how minor. Failures, however, were met with his notorious tirades, publicly berating his team and assigning blame without hesitation. His unpredictable temper kept everyone on edge, afraid to make even the smallest mistake. Meetings were another tool in his arsenal of torment. He scheduled them during lunch breaks and after hours, ensuring no one could escape his grasp. These meetings were often pointless, serving only to reinforce his dominance and disrupt any semblance of work-life balance his team might have had. His relentless stream of emails continued around the clock, each carrying a thinly veiled threat, perfection or dismissal. Under his reign, morale plummeted and burnout soared. Yet Bits remained oblivious, satisfied only by his complete and total control. I was quite embarrassed when I learned he was from the same area as I was and had attended the same school, though years before me. In 2012, our company merged with a parent organization. While personnel largely stayed the same, we gained access to Microsoft Outlook and an organizational view. This was when I first learned about Bits from an organizational hierarchy perspective. His full name was an eye-opener. It was Bitsa. The name was common enough, but at the time, mobile numbers had area-specific patterns, so I already knew that the previous owner of my number was from the same area as me. Still, I wanted to dig deeper to confirm it was him. I spoke with an old mentor who lived in the same area and had coached several high school students over the last 2 decades. He confirmed my suspicions. I won't go into details, but it was evident that Bitsa and Bits were indeed the same person. I had harbored frustration with this unknown person named Bitsa for almost a decade by then, and Bits had been the source of misery for me and several others for quite some time. This is where the revenge lies. First, I unblocked all the numbers in my phone. I had been receiving around 5 to 6 calls daily on average, but after unblocking about 150 numbers, it increased to 15-18. My answering strategy changed drastically. Instead of saying, "Wrong number," I politely explained that the owner had changed his number and provided his current contact number to update their database. Here's where I might be at fault. I also volunteered his manager's number, in case he tried anything else. The fallout was remarkable. These people had been trying to find him for almost a decade. Banks had sold his debts to companies that specialize in collecting debts, meaning they were relentless in their pursuit to get their money back. It turned out he had been taking loans in the names of various family members: his wife, parents, uncles, and aunts and giving everyone the same phone number. He was evading credit card debt and loans of upwards of $200,000 converted to US dollars, but it was a significant amount where we were from. Apparently, he had nearly 20 cases filed against him, but no one could find him, probably why he thought he could get away with it all. There are multiple accounts of what happened at the office when his manager began receiving calls about him. Ultimately, he was let go about 2 months later, and I haven't heard from him since. Story 2. So some MLM scammers, let's call them sector marketing and cutblow, sent me a barrage of letters for their MLM scam, exploited public records to start sending them pretty much the second I turned 18. They apparently didn't know I graduated a semester early in December, and all the congratulations crap was 6 months late. I got 7 letters, and despite returning most of them to the sender, they kept sending them. I knew exactly what sector marketing was, and knew they send letters until you interview, so I decided to comply and join the interview. So I applied online. It was literally just a first name, last name, email and phone. I used email and phone throwaways. Within 2 minutes of applying online, I got a text from Upline. This is the person who sent out the letters, likely. They put some very misleading info and asked when I wanted to interview. They texted me 4 times in 30 minutes before I responded, then 8 times in 2 hours before I responded, setting up the time. Unfortunately, the interview was the first interview in which you don't get to talk to the interviewer, and they interviewed 10+ people at once. I asked in the chat stupid and irrelevant questions, but there was no response. I wouldn't be surprised if the whole thing was pre-recorded. But at the end, I get a link to the real application. I made sure to fill out the real application with the dumbest, somewhat realistic stuff I could come up with. I also put in Upline's phone number instead of mine. It was a dumb Google form instead of a proper application, so it was quite exploitable. Here were my answers. High school attended? Graduation year? I have not graduated yet. I graduate on the 10th. This is because a kid called in a bomb threat at my last graduation. He did this twice, so I hope he doesn't call in a bomb threat again. I am 18 though per public records, so even if he calls in another bomb threat, I should be good to work here. Are you involved in any sports/clubs/organizations? What are your hobbies? I was involved in the unofficial booze drinkers club in my school. I never received credit for it, but it was a lot of fun. Basically, you try to drink a lot of alcohol and go to classes like normal. The person who can go the longest without a teacher or staff noticing wins a case of beer. My record is 5 hours, 34 minutes, and 46.4 seconds. I won 3 cases this year and sold them as individual cans to my classmates for $10 each. I made $720 off this and bought a car with it. I think that shows how I am good at selling stuff and saving money. Have you had any leadership roles in the past? Yes. I was one of the main people doing the trendy weird challenges at my school. The school didn't like it, but my classmates loved me. If accepted for a position and given proper training, why do you think you would be successful? I would be successful because my advanced seduction skills translate very well to selling. I also sold the beers in school and didn't even need the seduction skills for that. I also plan to sell my car at some point, so I need experience. What are some goals you have for your future? My goal is to be able to buy a new car. The car I bought with the beer money can only go 60 miles per hour and has a knock in the engine and doesn't have any coolant in it. But I want a Lamborghini which can go 250 miles per hour. It will also help me with the ladies. Getting this job will help me get a source of income so I can work towards my goals. If accepted for a position, how would working at Sector help you achieve those goals? It would provide me with money and connections. The money helps me buy the Lambo and help with the ladies as well. The connections are nice because they might be women, and if I can sell these knives to them, I can probably also seduce them. The idiots actually called me would be Upline's phone number, and Michael and Rachel thinking they were all valid leads. I answered the call to my number, And he started talking, then hung up and called again to leave a 5-second empty voicemail. I told him I could interview on the 10th because my graduation got canceled again, and he blocked me. Somehow I doubt I will be getting any more letters from these guys. Story 3. This incident took place a few years ago during the COVID-19 pandemic. I can't remember the exact year when I worked as a deckhand and lifeguard on a snorkeling excursion boat. I am a free diver, and occasionally, though rarely, I go spearfishing. Shortly before the pandemic, a friend of mine, who is a photographer, added me to a diving group she was part of. I was excited because I didn't have many diving buddies, and I didn't enjoy diving alone, so I thought this might be a chance to make some new diving friends. My partner and I live with his parents, and his mother is at high risk for severe illness, so we were very cautious about COVID-19 precautions and social distancing. One day, I decided to join a dive outing with about 7 other people from the group. I figured it would be manageable to keep my distance. This was my first time meeting most of these people, aside from my friend. Before we even got in the water, I began to sense that they might not be my kind of people. I tried to engage with them, but most weren't interested in chatting. They formed a close circle to talk, leaving me awkwardly on the outside because I needed to maintain distance. I tried to involve myself in their discussions, but it felt like they weren't very welcoming, so I eventually stopped trying. After that dive, I decided I would wait until the COVID-19 situation improved before joining them again, unless the group size was smaller. I kept an eye on the group chat in case there was a small gathering, but it was usually larger groups, or the timing didn't work out. Through reading the group chats, I got to know a bit more about this group. Many of them were vegan, and they weren't thrilled when I asked if anyone wanted to join a spearfishing session. Some were also hesitant about vaccines, and a number of them were either photographers or influencers. I did have a few good friends in the group, but I had met them before joining. I worked on the excursion boat 3 days a week, but my captain wanted to hire someone else for the other 2 or 3 days a week. I offered the job to people in the diving group since most of them could free dive the minimum 40 feet required for the job. Only one person showed interest, but our schedules didn't align. Then, the group admin, whom we'll call Macy, removed me from the group chat without warning. I only found out when I tried to access the chat, and it was gone, so I messaged her about it. She explained that she removed me because I wasn't participating in dives at the time. I had told the group that I was only joining dives with 2 or 3 people until vaccines were available or COVID-19 was less of a concern. Since most of the dive outings had been larger groups, I hadn't participated much. Macy said she needed to make room for people who were more active in the group. It stung a bit, but I understood. I thought it was odd that she didn't inform me beforehand, but I decided to move on, as I still had friends outside of the group. What I never told them was that I also managed the social media for the boat company I worked for. A few days after I was removed from the group, I received a message on the company's social media account from Macy. She wasn't inquiring about the open position we had or offering to help us gain business to survive COVID-19. Instead, she asked for a free half-day excursion to a neighboring island, saying it would give our company exposure. She claimed her followers would book our trips and that her promotion would bring in a boost in profits. I wasn't entirely surprised, but I was disappointed. I don't remember my exact reply, but this is close to what I wrote back. Hello, thank you for reaching out to our company. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19 restrictions, our capacity has been cut in half to adhere to social distancing guidelines. This has led to increased demand since what we could previously accommodate in one excursion now requires 2 trips per day, each at maximum capacity. While you promise that exposure will increase our bookings, we would require a formal contract showing concrete numbers and an agreement to reimburse us if those projections fall short before offering a free half-day excursion in place of a paying guest. We're also short-staffed and currently only operating 3 days a week, which further limits our income under the financial strain of COVID-19. It's well known that local businesses are struggling with these constraints. and we find it inappropriate to request free excursions from small businesses during this challenging time. We can offer you a resident discount, but that is the best we can do. We hope you choose to support small businesses during this time, but we understand if the pandemic has also put financial strain on you. We do have open positions if you're having difficulty finding work and making ends meet. Macy never responded, and I didn't talk to or see her again. About 6 months to a year later, COVID-19 travel restrictions were eased, and we experienced a surge of tourists. Our already high demand skyrocketed, and we were running 3 to 4 trips per day, almost back to back, because we were still short-staffed. I worked incredibly hard, but I earned a lot, managing to save for a major purchase much faster than I'd planned. All I could think was how, if Macy had taken up the job offer instead of asking for free services, she could have had a great job on the water and been making good money. Story 4. I'm a single mom to my amazing 12-year-old daughter who has cerebral palsy. We've managed pretty well over the years, learning to navigate life with her wheelchair and various challenges. The local mall has become our weekend sanctuary. It's fully accessible, and my daughter loves watching people while we have lunch at the food court. Last Saturday started like any other mall visit. We just finished our lunch, and my daughter indicated she needed to use the restroom. No problem, we have our radar key for the disabled facilities, which is a special key system in the UK that gives disabled people access to accessible toilets. As we approached the disabled restroom, I could see my daughter was getting a bit anxious. She always gets nervous when she needs to go, and waiting makes it worse. I was pushing her wheelchair when we noticed the disabled toilet was occupied. No worries, we thought, we'll wait our turn. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. My daughter was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, squirming in her wheelchair. That's when this woman and her perfectly able-bodied daughter, probably around 8 years old, came strutting up to the disabled toilet. The woman looked at us, then started banging on the door. She called out to whoever was inside, asking if anyone was in there and demanding to know how much longer they'd be. The door opened, and another customer walked out. Before I could even move my daughter's wheelchair, this woman, let's call her Karen, pushed past us and went straight in with her daughter. I called out after her, telling her we'd been waiting for 10 minutes and that my daughter needed the accessible facilities. From behind the door, Karen shouted back that they'd only be a minute because her daughter needed changing. I was stunned. There were regular toilets with baby changing facilities literally 20 feet away. I pointed this out to her, explaining that this was a disabled toilet and my daughter actually needed it. Karen's muffled voice came through the door again, saying this one was bigger and cleaner and telling us to wait our turn. My daughter started tearing up, which broke my heart. A small crowd had gathered, watching the scene unfold. After what felt like forever, but was probably another 10 minutes, Karen finally emerged with her daughter, looking smug. She had the nerve to tell us that it hadn't been that long of a wait, and then accused us of being entitled and acting like we owned these toilets. That's when something in me snapped. The past hour of watching my daughter suffer in discomfort, combined with this woman's audacity, was too much. I let loose, asking her how she dared call us entitled when she just made a disabled child wait 20 minutes in discomfort because she was too lazy to use the regular toilets. I pointed out that neither she nor her daughter were disabled, and that she had no right to use this facility when someone who actually needed it was waiting. A mall security guard who had been watching the situation approached us. He asked if there was a problem. I explained how this woman had prevented my disabled daughter from using the accessible toilet for 20 minutes because she wanted a bigger, cleaner space. The security guard turned to Karen, who was now turning red. He informed her that these facilities were specifically for disabled individuals, and that using them when she didn't need them and preventing access to those who did was against mall policy. He told her she would need to come with him. Karen started spluttering excuses about not knowing and claiming it wasn't fair, but the security guard was having none of it. He escorted her away while another guard took her information. Apparently, she's now banned from the mall for 3 months. The best part? Several onlookers came up to us afterward and offered their support. One elderly lady even bought my daughter an ice cream to cheer her up. It wasn't how I planned to spend our Saturday at the mall, but at least justice was served. Story 5. Last weekend, I went to a party thrown by some friends to welcome home another friend who had just returned from military deployment. It was a great time while I was there. Unfortunately, the fun didn't last long. At some point, I was left unsupervised and ended up playing with the kids for a while, and that was fun. Until one of the moms noticed what I was doing and yelled at me. She shouted, "I do not want to see my child flying higher than the top of the trampoline net. Do not make me come over there." Nothing quite like being 36 years old and having a bunch of kids look at you, giggle, and say, "Ooh, someone's in trouble." Naturally, I made the responsible adult decision to leave the trampoline and try riding a zip line that someone had hung between two trees. After all, if anything could help me regain my cool points, it was doing something that seemed both ridiculous and daring. But, of course, I completely botched the takeoff, and rather than gracefully ziplining, I fell 6 feet from the tree, landing on the ground and giving myself a grade 3 shoulder sprain to my dominant arm, no less. I knew something was wrong when I sat up and felt what seemed like a rock pressing into my shoulder. Only there was no rock. I looked at the biggest kid nearby and said, "Please go find an adult." The child ran off, shouting for their mom, which I appreciated immensely. Then, one of my little friends noticed my discomfort and ran over to help. And by help, I mean she started doing judo chops on the strange bump that had appeared on my shoulder, presumably thinking it would fix things. She's very lucky I was in shock at the time. But it's the thought that counts, right? After 5 uncomfortable hours in the emergency room, I walked out with a sling, some painkillers, a few x-rays, and instructions to call my doctor first thing Monday morning. It's frustrating that I'll be facing a hefty bill considering the cost versus what I received, but I digress. I spent most of last week on the couch, trying to explain to my dog that, yes, I could see the ball, but no, I couldn't grab it. Nor could I help with his walks or dinner. All I could manage was lying there like a lump and watching TV, with maybe an awkward pat if I tried really hard. The poor dog is convinced I hate him by now. Then yesterday came around, and supplies at home were running low. The orthopedic specialist I spoke to advised that I should be as active as I could comfortably manage, and I had an idea. For 36 years, I'd gone to the grocery store and seen those motorized shopping carts, always imagining what it would be like to hop in one and drive off. But I never had a reason to try, until yesterday. With my dominant arm out of commission and bending over causing excruciating pain, I figured I qualified just enough to responsibly use one of the powered carts the store keeps for patrons with mobility challenges. Did I park in a handicapped spot? No. Did I shop with a mobility scooter? Absolutely. I did my best to look the part: socks with shower shoes, pajama pants, a reasonably clean t-shirt, and a hefty dose of spray on deodorant. My sling brought my 2 shoulders to different heights, which seemed authentic enough. I checked with a manager to make sure it was all right for me to use the cart, and he gave me the go-ahead. My chariot awaited. But some dreams should remain dreams. The cart moved at a pace that could only be described as painfully slow, so much so that I stopped making race car noises with my mouth after the first aisle. While I was browsing for snacks, a small voice behind me piped up, "Whoa, cool, my turn?" Turning with a separated shoulder is a mistake you only make once, so I slowly pivoted the cart to see a young child eyeing me and the cart with envy. I replied, "Sorry, I'm using it right now. But once I'm done, and whoever you're with says it's okay, you can absolutely have a turn." The child didn't respond, but they looked rather frustrated. I awkwardly pivoted the cart back in the original direction and headed toward the snack aisle. I stood up to grab something from the top shelf and briefly stepped off the cart to make sure the snack bag was airtight. Balancing with one hand was tricky. Once satisfied, I reached back with my left arm, expecting to feel the bag hit the cart's basket. Instead, I felt nothing. When I turned, I saw my cart slowly rolling down the aisle, being piloted by a familiar-looking child. I took about 4 steps to catch up. "Hey, my stuff is in there, and I kinda need it," I said in a raised, but not quite yelling, voice, just loud enough to alert employees that adult supervision might be needed. The child heard me, turned, and stuck out their tongue, a classic response, admittedly. I kept pace with the cart, brainstorming how to retrieve it without touching the child or hurting myself, when a woman's voice and footsteps approached from behind. "What are you doing? Hey, stop." Before I could explain, she reached out and grabbed my shoulder firmly, aiming to get my attention. Unfortunately, my collarbone was still very much out of place. Her grip effectively dug into my collarbone, causing unimaginable pain. In the haze of agony, I vaguely remember screaming, grabbing her hand, pushing it off my shoulder, and then pushing her back. Turns out, pain and adrenaline can make you quite strong. Things were a bit blurry after that. The next thing I knew, I was seated at the front of the store, explaining what happened to 2 police officers. One officer stopped looking exasperated and started to look sympathetic as I recounted the story. From the other side of the store, I could hear the woman's voice as she talked to another pair of officers. "He was standing. Everyone knows people who use those carts can't walk, and he could. How was I supposed to know? All I saw was some stranger chasing my child. I thought it was some new trend or something." Soon, emergency medical services arrived with a stretcher, entering on the same side as the woman. I heard her say, "Oh, thank goodness. I was worried I'd have to drive myself to the hospital." She seemed taken aback when they walked past her and toward me instead. At least I wasn't paying for this ride. My friend had driven me to the emergency room the first time, but somehow word of my tree mishap had spread. To my amusement, the emergency medical team had heard about my fall, and they didn't hesitate to give me a good-natured ribbing. It was one of the more interesting ambulance rides I've had. Funnily enough, I ended up with the same triage nurse as last time, and she put me in the same ward with the same physician's assistant and nurse as last week. The "I remember you, but I don't remember where" looks were relentless. "Yes, I am the same grown-up kid who fell out of a tree last week," I admitted. "Go ahead and laugh." On the upside, they didn't misplace my X-rays this time, so I was out in 3 hours instead of 5. No additional damage, thankfully. I think I'll stick to grocery delivery until my arm is back in action. Story 6. In 2018, I worked for a very small business owned by a wealthy couple from a Western European country. They had 3 employees total, including myself, at the time I started. The job was easy and straightforward at first, but there were some red flags early on. The position started off with 2 weeks as a training period, during which I would work with another person. After that 2 weeks, I'd work shifts on my own on weekdays and with one other person on weekends. This meant that employees couldn't have normal lunches or breaks, which goes against our state's labor laws. I never signed a waiver for this, and it wasn't clear that I couldn't take my lunch breaks when I started. They had gluten-free options and heavily advertised this on social media. Any other establishment in our state would have adhered to strict sanitation requirements to avoid cross-contamination, but these people were shockingly relaxed. They never asked me for a copy of my food handler's license before training me to cook, and they instructed me to clean the entire shop with rags and plain water. No separate cooking surface or utensils for gluten-free menu items. A few weeks into my hiring, they purchased jugs of sanitizer and explained that they were expecting an inspector from the health department. They instructed me to not use the sanitizer because using it regularly was too expensive, but to keep it visible and lie to the health inspector about our sanitation practices. From there, things only got shadier. I received a flat $40.80 in tips with each paycheck. However, the rounded to the nearest $5 increments of tips seemed suspiciously low. When I worked the register, I saw hundreds of dollars in card tips and knew they could have only been split by myself and 2 other people. We should have been making that bi-weekly figure per person in one day if it was busy. The owner got abnormally upset if my coworker and I split our tips at the end of each shift. The owner knew about things like that because he installed surveillance cameras shortly after I was hired. He watched it at all hours of the day, often monitoring the shop from his car in the nearby parking lot. Soon, I started getting reprimanded regularly for going against the early red flags. If he saw me eating lunch, he told me that he didn't care if I ate, but I'd better look ready to cook if a customer walked by. I'd have to stay at the register, but not let anyone see me eat. I'd often go days without eating more than one meal because my hours were so long and I never got more than a minute to put anything in my face. If he saw me using the sanitizer, he'd insist that I was wasting his money. I told him that I felt concerned using the same cooking utensils for gluten-free dishes as I did for dishes that contained gluten. I felt that since so many of our customers had gluten-sensitive allergies, it was only a matter of time until someone got sick. He told me that he had been operating this way for over a year and nobody ever got sick, so there's no point in worrying about it. I noticed my tips were about $10 less than usual that pay period. Additionally, the owner expected us to cook for customers if we were still physically present in the shop, no matter where we were in our closing procedures. We were never to turn anyone down, but we wouldn't be paid overtime if closing took longer as a result. We also weren't allowed to start any of the closing procedures early because he didn't want customers to think we were closed, even if we were. Eventually, one of the other employees announced she was pregnant. As her pregnancy progressed, her ability to carry out a lot of her responsibilities diminished. It was medically necessary for her to cease heavy lifting, to be able to sit down, and to have access to her breaks and lunches to get her proper nutrition. The owner reprimanded her for these things and told her that he expected her to operate at her pre-pregnancy capacity. He added that she shouldn't let pregnancy make her lazy and that if she didn't remain active and she let herself eat all the time, her baby would come out fat like her. She tried to call out sick once, too. She had to rush to the hospital because she was experiencing abnormalities in her pregnancy and thought she might have been miscarrying. She and the baby turned out to be fine, but the owner yelled at her for missing her shift and told her that he didn't care if she miscarried. Her responsibility was to him first. She ended up quitting, but remained friends with them. I don't lie to be honest. The owner's wife wrote passive-aggressive notes explaining that they were always watching us during our shifts and that they would start deducting our tips if we made any mistakes. If we made a mistake from cooking resulting in us wasting ingredients, it would come from our tips. If we broke an item in the inventory, it would come out of our tips. If we took too long to finish closing duties, still no overtime, and it would come out of our tips. It became more and more obvious that the owners included themselves in the tip pool, which is also illegal in our state. I was the only employee at the time who didn't feel threatened by these people. My other coworker was an illegal immigrant from the same country as the owners. They treated her like crap, and she didn't feel like she could do or say anything about it because they repeatedly and falsely told her that she had no rights. They gaslighted her into thinking that they were so nice to hire her when no one else would. She felt like she had to work for them, and she had to do whatever they told her to do because if she didn't, she'd lose her only source of income with no guarantee of another one. If anyone confronted the owners about any of their violations, they'd act shocked and insist that they were so new to the country that they don't know any of the laws yet. Any of their general jerk acts was a cultural difference. They relied on these two defenses so much that they never bothered to actually protect themselves from a legal standpoint. I already knew I wanted to quit and that I wanted to alert local authorities to all their violations. But the final straw for me was when they cut my pay for making mistakes while I was exhausted and processing personal trauma. They made me sign a contract agreeing to the cut, but applied it retroactively to the pay period before the contract was signed. While it sucked not getting that extra money, I laughed for 20 minutes straight when I put together my pay stub and my copy of the contract. They basically offered themselves up on a silver platter because of their own incompetence. I documented everything I could, because everything was so hilariously illegal. I had compiled a thick portfolio of evidence in no time and filed a wage complaint at the same time I handed in my 2 weeks' notice. Once they knew about the wage complaint, they started a campaign of slander against me, which made me lose my next job. I didn't have hard evidence of that, so I let it go and applied somewhere else. The stolen tips really screwed up my taxes. My former bosses reported my actual tips to the IRS, Internal Revenue Service, but kept me in the dark about the figure and gave me so much less that I ended up owing the IRS $400 more than what I expected. I spent the time between my employment with them and the hearing with the Labor Commissioner at the Department of Labor working alone on my case. On the day of the hearing, my former bosses brought their immigration lawyer and a stranger they paid off to act like they were my coworker, who had no idea why I filed a complaint against them in the first place. All the evidence he presented against me had nothing to do with my claims of not getting paid overtime, not getting my meal breaks, and having my tips stolen. It was all just fake letters from fake people with awful Mary Sue Ock type names. All the documents he presented could have been typed up the night before. It was so bad. Their defense relied heavily on slander, too. Who would you trust? Me, a straight-A university student at a prestigious school, or her, an uneducated lowlife with an entry-level job? Every time I presented hard evidence to the labor commissioner, the lawyer scrambled to come up with an explanation for why I was lying, but failed miserably. When I showed the labor commissioner my contract informing me of the pay cut with the pay stub reflecting a retroactive cut, the lawyer still didn't understand what was happening. Their defense absolutely crumbled, and the labor commissioner poked several holes in their stories. Fast forward to about a year later, I received a $2,300 check in the mail, which meant that I was awarded every penny due to me. What made this even sweeter for me was the date on the check. It was the same as the start of our city's stay-at-home order due to the pandemic. Not only are they losing money due to decreased business as a result of COVID-19, but they were legally required to pay me out at the same time. I won't be surprised if they don't survive the economic impact. But unlike the vast majority of small businesses in my area, they actually deserve it. Revenge is sweet.